Mud packed beneath my fingernails like a verdict. My knees sank again as someone yanked my hair back, forcing my face toward the aisle, toward the white runner already stained by boots and spilled wine, toward the altar where my life was being sealed shut without me. The chapel's doors stood open to a late autumn drizzle, and cold slid in as if it had paid for a seat. I tasted iron. Someone had split my lip and made sure I remembered to keep smiling anyway. Ahead, she turned just enough for me to see the curve of her mouth. Marcelline, my father's second wife's daughter, my beloved little sickness, wore a veil embroidered with moonflowers, the kind only a high Omega would be permitted to wear at a bond ceremony. The lace trembled at her shoulders like she was innocent, like she had never pressed my face into a wash basin, and whispered, sweetly, that no one would miss me if I stopped breathing. She lifted her wrist to the officiant. On the underside of her skin, a thin line of fresh blood shone, the ritual cut made to draw sent out and invited into the bond. The alpha at her side, tall, polished, dressed in the dark formal coat of House Rhost, inclined his head with solemn devotion. Bazillion Rhost. He didn't look at me. He had been trained not to look at what was on the floor, but my body looked at him. My blood looked at him. The place just beneath my ribs ached with a feral recognition I had never asked for. It had begun months ago, a tug in crowded hallways, a shiver when his shadow crossed mine. I had thought it was fear, because fear is what girls like me are allowed to feel. Now I knew it had been fate, and Marcelline had stolen it. The potion still burned at the back of my throat where her hand had forced the vial between my teeth an hour ago. Bitter and metallic, like a coin held too long under the tongue. A scent thief draft, illegal, expensive, devastating. It didn't make her become me, not truly. It only painted her skin with the illusion of my pheromones, stole the signature my body had spent years forming, and draped it over her like a borrowed cloak. The chapel inhaled her and believed. Bazillion's gaze softened in worship, his alpha instincts obedient to the lie. The air around them thickened, the way it did when an alpha's dominance rose to claim space, to announce, "This one is mine." My stomach turned. Not because I wanted him, though the traitorous ache inside me screamed that I did, but because I knew what came after the vows. A binding mark, a bite meant to anchor an Omega to her alpha's will, meant to make her scent bloom and declare to every nose in the realm that she had been taken. In this world, an Omega's scent was currency, weapon, and chain. It could start wars. It could end bloodlines. It could be stolen. My throat tightened, and I forced air into lungs that wanted to refuse it. Bazillion marked her while she wore my scent. The bond would try to knit to the wrong body. The magic wouldn't care about justice. It would care about scent. And I would be, what? A discarded husk that still carried the ghost of a bond that wasn't mine. Someone's boot pressed into the back of my shoulder, a reminder to keep my head bowed. The chapel's stone floor chilled my skin through my torn dress. A lock of hair, once copper gold, now matted and brown with grime, stuck to my cheek. The officiant raised his hands. The words began, old as the first pacts. Promises about protection and obedience, about the moon's blessing and the alpha's duty. The crowd murmured approval at the right places. They loved a story where the pretty girl in white was cherished. They didn't love the story where the girl in rags had been dragged from a servant's corridor and made into a cautionary tale. Marcelline's eyes found mine again through the veil. She blinked slowly, savoring my helplessness. Her scent, my scent, spilled over the chapel in sweet, night-blooming notes I'd only ever known from inside my own skin. It made me nauseous to smell myself on someone else. She mouthed one word. Watch. The officiant turned to Bazillion. The ceremonial blade flashed, silver catching candlelight. Bazillion's jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, his alpha senses pulling in what he thought was his destined Omega. A low, hungry sound rolled in his chest, barely restrained, more animal than man. I flinched. Not from him. From fate, from the cruel, simple certainty that I was about to be erased while everyone clapped. Bazillion leaned toward Marcelline's throat, where the skin waited, warm and soft beneath the veil. And then the chapel doors exploded inward. Not with splintering wood, those doors were reinforced oak, bound in iron and old warding runes. They didn't splinter. They gave way like frightened animals. Cold wind slammed through the opening, scattering candle flames into frantic, sideways dances. The rain outside turned from drizzle to hard needles. Boots struck stone in a rhythm that didn't belong to wedding guests. Men in dark cloaks fanned into the chapel with the efficiency of soldiers, their hands near the hilts of their weapons, their eyes scanning corners like they expected an ambush, even at an altar. And at their center walked a man who made the air feel smaller. He was taller than Bazillion by a full head, broader in the shoulders, dressed not in ceremonial finery, but in the severe black of the commander's uniform, high collar, silver braid, the crest of House Rhost worked into the leather at his throat. His hair was the color of storm ash, worn longer than court fashion allowed, and his gaze was a blade that didn't care who it cut. A scar crossed one brow, pale and clean, as if someone had tried to kill him and failed to do it properly. Cyprian Rhost. The brutal older brother, the army's commander. The one they said could scent fear the way other alphas scented heat. Every whisper I had ever heard about him came back to me at once, said like warnings over kitchen tables, said like prayers by girls who didn't want their paths to cross his. He didn't smile. He didn't bargain. He didn't forgive. And yet when his eyes swept the room, they didn't linger on the altar first. They landed on the floor, on me. The sound that left him wasn't loud, but it carried. A single, dangerous exhale, like a predator catching the first honest trace of prey. Bazillion straightened, offended and startled, dominance surging up in defense of his ceremony. "Brother, you were not invited." Cyprian walked forward anyway, boots striking the runner, splashing through the thin puddles the wind had blown in. His soldiers stayed near the doors, a silent wall. The officiant froze mid-blessing, hands still raised as if he could ward off reality with ritual. Cyprian's gaze never left me. It should have made me feel smaller. It should have made me want to crawl away. Instead, something in my chest, a battered, stubborn ember, flared with a heat that wasn't mine to claim. Because that look wasn't disdain. It was recognition. Like my ruined state offended him personally. Marcelline's fingers tightened on the veil. "Commander," she said, voice bright and trembling with performed innocence. "This is our sacred." Cyprian's head turned slowly toward her, and the chapel seemed to lean away. "You," he said, and it wasn't a greeting. It was an assessment. Bazillion stepped in front of Marcelline with the reflex of a properly trained alpha, shoulders squared, jaw set. "This is my bond ceremony. If you've come to make a spectacle, I've come because my scouts reported a scent anomaly in my brother's wedding," Cyprian cut in. His voice was low, even, the kind of calm that comes right before violence. And because I have never once known Bazillion to choose a bride without counting the political advantage. A ripple of shock moved through the guests. Some looked away, suddenly fascinated by candle wax. Others leaned forward like they'd paid for entertainment after all. Bazillion's eyes flashed. "You dare insult. I dare do what I want," Cyprian said, and the words were simple enough to be terrifying. His gaze slid past Bazillion, landing on Marcelline again. "Lift the veil." Marcelline let out a delicate laugh that shook at the edges. "Tradition forbids," Cyprian took one more step, close enough that even across the aisle I could feel the pressure of his dominance like a storm front. "Lift it." Marceline's cheeks went pale. She glanced at Basilian, expecting him to rescue her. Basilian hesitated, not from doubt, but from the instinct that told him his brother's commands were not empty threats. With trembling fingers, Marcelline raised the veil. She was beautiful in a way that made people forgive her sins. Dark lashes, smooth skin, lips tinted rose. The kind of face painters loved because it made virtue easy to depict. Cyprian stared at her for a heartbeat. Then his nostrils flared. His gaze sharpened, not with lust, not with admiration, but with disgust so cold it felt clean. "That scent on you," he said, "is borrowed." Marceline's mouth opened. "How?" Cyprian's head turned again, slow, deliberate, as if something else in the chapel had called him. His eyes found me on the floor, and I felt it, not a fantasy. Not a story told by older Omegas to frighten girls into obedience. An alpha's attention can be physical. It can settle on your skin like a hand. Cyprian's gaze settled on me like a claim he hadn't yet earned. "Bring her," he said. The man holding my hair hesitated. He wasn't a soldier. He was a household guard in ceremonial trim, meant to look impressive but not meant to oppose a commander. His grip loosened without permission, like his fingers had forgotten how to disobey. I sucked in air. Mud and blood and candle smoke. 2 of Cyprian's soldiers crossed the aisle and stopped beside me. They didn't touch me roughly. They didn't leer. They simply reached down with the careful efficiency of men who had carried the wounded off battlefields, hands sure and controlled. Still, terror spiked. My body had learned that hands meant pain. I jerked back, slipping in the mud. "Don't." Cyprian's gaze flickered, not softened, but sharpened, as if my fear were a problem he intended to solve. "No one will strike you again," he said. "Not here." It sounded like an oath spoken to the universe, not to me. Basilian's voice cracked through the chapel like a whip. "She is nothing, a servant, a stray Omega my household took in out of charity." Marceline's laugh returned, brighter now that Basilian had spoken. "My sister is unwell, Commander. She's been confused. She imagines things. The scent you think you sense is mine." Cyprian didn't even glance at Basilian when he replied, "You don't get to tell me what my nose knows." Heat flushed my throat at the words "my nose," because that was the first time anyone in that chapel had spoken like an alpha's instincts mattered more than social convenience. In court, instinct was always dressed up and taught to sit still. But Cyprian's instinct walked in with muddy boots and didn't apologize. The soldiers lifted me. Pain shot through my ribs. I bit down on a cry and tasted more blood. My arms hung uselessly for a moment until I forced them to wrap around one soldier's shoulder for balance. The chapel spun. Faces blurred into a single mass of judgment. Cyprian approached until he was close enough that I could see flecks of pale gold in his eyes, like sunlight trapped under ice. He looked at my torn sleeves, at the bruises flowering along my wrists where someone had gripped too hard. He looked at the dried blood at my temple. Then he inhaled, and the change in him was instantaneous. His posture didn't soften, his expression didn't become kind, but something behind his eyes turned feral, possessive, sharp-edged with certainty. His gaze snapped to Basilian. "You were about to mark her scent," he said, voice dropping into something deadly. "On the wrong throat." Basilian stiffened. "That is my intended." Cyprian moved. One step, lightning fast, and suddenly he was in Basilian's space, so close their coats brushed. Cyprian didn't draw a blade. He didn't need one. His dominance rolled out, crushing, ancient, forcing several guests to lower their eyes instinctively. Basilian's jaw clenched, fighting it. You cannot disrupt a bond ceremony. The moon, "The moon doesn't bless thieves," Cyprian said, and his eyes flicked to Marcelline like a sentence. "Nor the alphas who prefer a convenient lie to an inconvenient truth." Marcelline's lips trembled. "He is my mate. He chose me." Cyprian's gaze returned to me. "Did he choose you?" he asked quietly. "Or did they choose for him?" I couldn't answer. My voice had been trained out of me, punished out of me. My throat worked soundlessly, and shame burned hotter than the cold. Cyprian didn't wait for my words. He turned to the officiant. "This ceremony is suspended under Commander's authority. Any protest will be interpreted as treason against House Rhost." The officiant's hands lowered slowly, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Basilion's face went red with fury. "You can't simply—" "I can," Cyprian said. "And I am," he gestured. One soldier moved to stand between Basilion and the altar. Another took position near Marcelline, not touching her, merely existing as a warning. Cyprian's eyes came back to me again, and for the first time his voice dropped enough that it felt meant for my ears alone. "What's your name?" The soldier holding me shifted, waiting. The chapel held its breath. My tongue felt thick. My heart hammered so hard it made my bruises throb. "Marcelline," I managed, the syllables scraping out of me. "Marcelline Vey." At my name, Marcelline made a small, sharp sound, like she'd bitten her own tongue. Hearing it said aloud by someone who mattered felt like a crack in the wall she'd built around my life. Cyprian repeated it once, as if tasting it. "Marcelline." His gaze dropped to my throat, not in hunger, in focus. In the way a man looked at a wound he intended to treat. Then, because he was an alpha and power liked to show itself, he raised his voice again for everyone. "I'm taking her." A shocked chorus rose from the guests. Basilion surged forward. "She is in my house, under my authority." Cyprian's smile, when it appeared, was thin and wrong in the best way. "Then consider this an insult, brother. I'll be delighted if you choke on it." Marcelline stepped forward, hands clenched. "You can't take her. She's unstable." Cyprian's gaze cut to her. "If you speak again, I'll have my physician examine your blood for potion residue in front of your guests." His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "And then I'll have you tried." Marcelline's face drained of color. She swallowed hard, her throat working, and for the first time I saw genuine fear crack her pretty composure. Cyprian turned away from them as if they were already finished. He moved closer to me, and the soldier eased me down just enough that my feet brushed the floor. I wobbled dizzy and my knees threatened to buckle again. Cyprian caught my elbow with one gloved hand. The contact sent a jolt through me, strange and electric. Alphas weren't meant to touch Omegas casually. In public, it was a statement. It meant ownership or intent. It meant the pack would notice. The pack did notice. A hush fell that was heavier than any prayer. Cyprian's grip was firm but not painful. He didn't yank. He didn't drag. He steadied me like he expected me to stand. I tried. My legs shook. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against the shell of my ear, and the words he gave me were a command disguised as mercy. "Keep your eyes forward. Don't beg. Don't thank anyone. You're leaving with your dignity intact." I didn't know how to do that. My dignity had been peeled off me in layers for years. But something about his certainty made me want to obey, because obeying him felt like stepping onto solid ground. We started down the aisle. The chapel's air changed as we moved. People leaned back, making space. Some looked at me with disgust, an Omega in rags near an Alpha in uniform, like a stain near a sword. Others looked with curiosity, hungry for scandal. A few looked with something like pity. I kept my chin level, as he'd told me. The muscles in my neck screamed. Every bruise protested, but I did it. Halfway down the aisle, Basilion's voice rose again, harsh with humiliation. "You're making a mistake." Cyprian didn't stop. "You made yours the moment you let them drug your nose." "I can fix it," Bazillion snapped. Bring her back, like I was a misplaced object. Cyprian's steps slowed just enough that I felt the shift in his body. He turned his head slightly, not fully, and his reply was quiet but carried anyway. No. That single syllable hit the chapel like a door slamming. Outside, rain struck the stone steps in hard sheets. Cyprian's soldiers moved in formation, cloaks thrown over their shoulders, weapons kept low but ready. The carriage waiting beyond the gates was military, not ceremonial, dark wood, iron fittings, no family crest displayed, as if secrecy mattered more than pride. Cyprian guided me toward it. The cold outside was sharper than the chapel S. It bit into my damp clothes and made my teeth chatter. I stumbled on the steps, and for a moment panic surged, because falling meant being laughed at, meant being punished. Cyprian's hand tightened at my elbow. He didn't let me fall. His cloak moved with a swift, decisive motion, and then it was around my shoulders, heavy and warm, carrying the scent of leather, steel, and something darker underneath. Pine resin and smoke, the unmistakable stamp of an alpha who had survived too many nights. My breath caught. My skin heated under the borrowed warmth, my omega instincts reacting before my mind could organize fear into neat lines. You don't have to, I started, because gratitude was dangerous, and I didn't know what else to do with it. I do, he said, and the way he said it stole the argument from my mouth. He opened the carriage door himself. Get in. Inside, the carriage smelled of clean wool and oiled metal. A lantern swung from a hook, casting steady amber light. The bench seats were narrow, designed for quick transport, not comfort. I hesitated on the step, suddenly terrified that once the door closed, my fate would be worse than the chapel. A new kind of cage. Cyprian stepped close enough that my breath hitched. His gaze dropped to my mouth, to the split lip, and something unpleasant flickered in his eyes. Anger, not at me. Look at me, he said. I did. My throat tightened around the act. You're not going back there, he told me, each word placed like a stone in a wall. Not to their hands, not to their games, not to their lies. The air between us pulsed with something I didn't understand, something that made my skin feel too tight. My scent muted by mud and bruises, muffled by whatever residue of Marcelline's potion still clung to the world, stirred anyway, like a small creature waking in a cage. Cyprian inhaled again, and his jaw flexed. For a heartbeat, his control looked like it hurt. Get in, Marcelline, he repeated, softer this time, and the softness was somehow more dangerous than the command. Before I change my mind about how polite I intend to be, I climbed into the carriage. My hands shook as I gathered my torn skirt and sat, careful not to smear more mud than I already had. My body ached in a deep, pulsing way that made each breath an effort. The lantern light made the bruises on my wrists look like ink stains. Cyprian stepped in after me. The door shut. The sound was final. The carriage lurched as the horses started, wheels biting into wet ground. Outside, voices and scandal and chapel bells blurred into distance. Inside, there was only the lantern's steady sway and Cyprian's presence like a wall. He sat opposite me, one forearm braced on his knee, posture controlled, gaze fixed on my face as if he were memorizing it. Silence stretched, thick with things that could not yet be said. I tried to swallow. My throat hurt. At last, he spoke. Who did that to you? It wasn't a gentle question. It was a cold one, sharpened by promise. My first instinct was to lie. My second was to say nothing. Both instincts had kept me alive, but his cloak was on my shoulders, heavy with his scent, and my stupid, starving heart wanted to believe in rescue stories. My stepmother's guards, I whispered, and Marcelline. Cyprian's gaze didn't change much. It simply focused, like a blade finding the soft point between ribs. And Bazillion allowed it. I flinched because hearing it said aloud made it more real. Cyprian leaned back slightly, a controlled exhale leaving him. My brother has always preferred clean hands, he said, voice flat. He lets others do the dirt and calls himself noble. The carriage hit a rut. I jolted, pain flaring in my side. I bit down hard, refusing to make noise, refusing to be weak in front of him. Cyprian noticed anyway. He reached into a compartment beside him and pulled out a small tin. When he opened it, the scent of herbs rose, comfrey, yarrow, something antiseptic. A soldier's salve, practical, unsentimental. He held it out. I stared at it as if it might bite me. Why? His eyes lifted to mine. Because you're bleeding under my cloak. Under my cloak. Possession threaded through the words, casual as breath. It should have terrified me. It did, a little. But it also wrapped around the hollow inside me like warmth. My hands trembled as I took the tin. The metal was cool. I dipped my fingers into the salve and touched it to my split lip with a hiss. Pain sparked, then eased into a dull throb. Cyprian watched, expression unreadable. My sister, I said, the word tasting like rust. She used a potion to steal my scent. The confession fell out of me before I could stop it, like my body had been waiting for someone powerful enough to hear it. She wanted Bazillion. She said she'd always wanted him. She said I was only valuable because fate made me valuable. Cyprian's gaze sharpened. And you believed her. It wasn't a question. My fingers tightened around the tin. I didn't have a choice. The lantern swayed, painting moving shadows across his face. He looked older than Bazillion, not in years, but in weight, like he'd carried decisions that had cost lives. Yet something in his eyes, when he looked at me, was fiercely present, as if he couldn't afford to look away. You always have a choice, he said. Then, as if the words offended him with their simplicity, he added, sometimes the choices are just ugly. I laughed once, broken and small, because it was the closest thing to truth anyone had offered me. And what is my choice now? Cyprian's gaze dropped to the cloak around my shoulders. His nostrils flared slightly, his attention catching on something invisible. On scent, on the truth beneath the lies. He didn't answer immediately. The carriage rolled on, rain drumming the roof like impatient fingers. Then he spoke, and the words were not gentle. They were not romantic. They were a strategy. You're my problem now, he said, which means you're also my leverage. Cold slipped down my spine despite the cloak's warmth. A trophy. Cyprian's mouth curved, not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. If calling you a trophy keeps my brother from sending men to drag you back, then yes. I'll parade you through his pride until he bleeds humiliation. My stomach clenched. The fear returned, hot and choking. I had traded one cage for another, one family's cruelty for a commander's cruelty, except he had stopped the ceremony. He had wrapped me in his cloak. He had brought salve. My mind scrambled, trying to make the math work. Cyprian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze level with mine. Listen carefully, he said, and his voice dropped into something that felt like a private room inside the storm. I won't touch you without consent. I won't mark you. I won't force a bond. You'll eat, you'll sleep, you'll heal. The words struck me harder than any slap because they were so specific, so pointedly offered, like he understood exactly what kind of fear lived in my bones. My throat tightened. Why? His eyes held mine. Because I'm not them. A pause. The carriage creaked. And because, he added, quieter, I smelled you through the mud. Heat flashed across my skin, immediate and embarrassing. My Omega instincts stirred, confused, and hungry. My body wanted to lean toward him like a plant toward sun, and my mind wanted to punish my body for it. I looked down, staring at my hands, at the grime under my nails. You shouldn't have. I'm ruined. Cyprian's voice was sharp. You're injured. The correction snapped the shame in half for a heartbeat. He leaned back again, gaze going to the small window as if checking the world beyond. His shoulders stayed tense like he expected pursuit. I clutched the tin. "He'll come." "Yes," Cyprian said calmly. "Bazillion will come once he realizes what was taken from him." "And Marcelline," I whispered, my stomach twisting. "She'll say I'm lying. She'll cry and everyone will believe her." Cyprian's gaze returned to me, and something in it steadied, like a hand pressed to the small of my back. "Let her cry," he said. "I've drowned in worse." The carriage turned, and the motion made my bruised ribs scream again. My breath hitched. I pressed a hand to my side, trying to hold myself together. Cyprian noticed, of course. He noticed everything. He shifted, then reached into another compartment and pulled out a folded blanket. He tossed it across the small space. "Wrap yourself," he ordered, as if kindness had to be worn like armor to be bearable. I obeyed. The blanket smelled clean, sun-dried, like it had been packed for campaigns. I wrapped it over the cloak and felt, for the first time that day, something like safety touch my skin. My eyelids fluttered, exhaustion dragging at me. Pain, adrenaline, humiliation, everything was catching up at once. The carriage rocked gently, reins steady overhead. And then it happened. A faint, strange lightness in my chest. Like a knot loosening. My throat, which had burned for hours, suddenly felt clearer, as if something coating it had begun to dissolve. The bitter taste of the potion dulled, fading at the edges. My heart kicked hard. Fear spiked so fast it made me dizzy. Cyprian's head lifted instantly. His eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring. He could scent it, the truth waking up under the lie. "What is it?" he demanded. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. "The potion," I whispered. I think it's wearing off." For one heartbeat, the carriage felt too small to contain what that meant. If my scent returned fully, if it bloomed the way it was supposed to, unmasked and undeniable, then Bazillion would feel it across a crowded hall. Alphas could track fate like wildfire once it caught. And if Bazillion came for me, he wouldn't come with apologies. He would come with entitlement. Cyprian's gaze locked onto mine, and his dominance rolled through the carriage like a shield being raised. "Then we don't have much time," he said. Outside, far behind us, a distant horn sounded, faint through the rain but unmistakable. A signal. A hunt beginning. I swallowed hard, my body trembling under blanket and cloak, caught between dread and the dangerous, impossible hope that the man across from me might actually keep his promises. Cyprian reached for the carriage door latch, then paused, listening, calculating. His soldiers' voices murmured outside, low and urgent. He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw it, something that made my breath catch. Not pity, not amusement. A fierce, possessive intent that wasn't yet a claim but could become one. "Marcelline," he said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet, "if your scent returns, they will try to take you. When they do, you will stay behind me." I nodded, because I didn't have another plan, because my life had been nothing but other people's plans until this moment. Cyprian's hand closed around the door latch. The carriage jolted as the driver shouted, whipping the horses into a faster pace. My stomach lurched, and deep inside my chest, the knot loosened one more inch. My true scent rose like a secret, finally deciding to be heard. The horn sounded again, closer this time, and my body responded before my mind did. Every Omega instinct I'd been trained to suffocate woke up at once. Hide, submit, survive. My skin went hot under Cyprian's cloak, not with desire, but with the terrifying clarity of being found. The potion's false veil peeled away from me in invisible strips, and in its place my true scent rose, soft at first, then unmistakable, a signature I'd never been allowed to own. Cyprian went still, head angled as if listening through the carriage walls. Outside, hooves hammered wet earth. Men shouted, the words torn apart by wind and rain. Cyprian's gaze snapped to mine. "It's back," he said, not asking. I nodded, throat tight enough to hurt. He didn't look pleased. He looked resolved, the way a man looks when he's already chosen the part of himself he'll sacrifice. He slid the carriage window latch with 2 fingers and leaned out just enough to speak to his escort in a low, cutting stream of orders. The soldiers answered with brief acknowledgments, their voices disciplined, their mounts shifting restlessly in the mud. The carriage lurched into a sharper turn. My shoulder slammed into the bench. Pain flashed along my ribs and stole my breath. Cyprian's hand shot out, palm braced near my hip, not touching me, not taking liberties, simply creating a barrier so the next jolt wouldn't throw me to the floor. The gesture was so controlled it was almost cruel kindness delivered in a way that left no room to misunderstand. A shout rose behind us. Another horn. The hunt had teeth now. I clenched the blanket with numb fingers and forced myself to keep breathing through the ache. "He can track me," I whispered, hating the tremor in my voice. "He can try," Cyprian replied. The road narrowed. Trees closed in, skeletal branches clawing at the gray sky. Rain threaded through them in thin silver lines, turning the world into a blur of wet bark and churned mud. The carriage wheels skidded once, then caught again, and my stomach pitched hard. Then the first arrow struck. It hit the carriage side with a violent thunk, the shaft vibrating through the wood. Another followed, glancing off iron fittings with a shriek of metal on stone. The horses screamed. The driver swore and cracked the reins again, trying to outrun what couldn't be outrun for long. Cyprian's dominance rolled through the cramped space like a shield being raised, a pressure that made my lungs feel smaller but my spine straighter. He took a pistol from inside his coat, compact, practical, already loaded, and checked it with the ease of a man who lived expecting betrayal. I stared, because court alphas carried ornaments, commanders carried answers. "Stay low," he ordered. I obeyed, folding into myself, forehead nearly touching my knees. The blanket and cloak covered me like a tent, and inside that small darkness my scent seemed louder, pulsing with panic, broadcasting my existence to every alpha nose in the forest. A crash outside. One of the escort riders went down, horse screaming as it slid in mud. Men shouted. Steel rang. The carriage slowed. Not by choice. Cyprian swore under his breath, then reached across the small space and took my wrist. His gloved fingers were firm and warm, not bruising, not possessive, simply anchoring. "Marcelline," he said, forcing my eyes up. "You will do exactly what I say and you will live." My mouth opened, but no sound came. He squeezed once, a clean, clear signal. "Nod if you understand." I nodded. "Good." He released me immediately, as if he refused to let any touch linger long enough to become a claim. The carriage jolted to a stop so abruptly my teeth clicked. Outside, the driver shouted something frantic. Hooves pounded close. Someone slammed a fist against the carriage door. Cyprian leaned toward the lantern, snuffed it with 2 quick fingers, and darkness swallowed us. In that darkness, his eyes were pale, watchful. He opened the door a fraction, listened, then moved like a shadow slipping out of its skin. Cold air rushed in, sharp with rain and sweat and wet leather. I heard him speak one sentence, low and absolute, and then the sound of violence answered him. A body hit the mud with a wet thud. I pressed a hand to my mouth to keep from making any noise at all. The next seconds stretched thin, elastic, awful. I heard boots sliding, men grunting, steel scraping steel. An alpha's growl, close enough that my throat tightened instinctively. Then Cyprian's voice cut through, louder now, a command that didn't need a name. A horse shrieked. Another body fell. The door yanked open. Cyprian appeared, rain streaming down his hair, his uniform spattered with mud that wasn't all mud. His gaze dropped to me instantly, checking, counting. "Out," he said. Fear locked my joints. "I can't, you can," he snapped, and the sharpness wasn't cruelty. It was a lifeline thrown hard enough to bruise. He offered his hand, palm up, waiting. I took it. The moment I stepped down, the forest air hit me like a slap. The cold stole my breath. My torn shoes sank into mud. The cloak weighed heavy, soaked at the hem. Around us, Cyprian's soldiers formed a tight ring. 2 enemy riders lay motionless, their mounts gone. Another man, one of Basilion's household guards, was on his knees, hands bound, face gray with shock. The guard's eyes found me, wide and hateful. "She's property," he spat, rain mixing with his spit. "Lord Basilion will," Cyprian's boot pressed lightly to the man's shoulder, a quiet reminder of gravity. "Say property again," he said, voice soft as a blade's edge, "and I'll remove your tongue so you never confuse people and objects again." The guard went silent, shaking. Cyprian didn't look at him after that. His attention stayed on the road behind us, on the distant shouts that meant more riders were coming. His soldiers moved with brutal efficiency. One cut the traces, another checked the horses, another hauled the bound guard up like a sack. Cyprian turned back to me and caught my chin, not forcing, just guiding my gaze upward. His gloved thumb didn't touch my lips, didn't soothe. It simply steadied. "Listen," he said. "We're leaving the carriage. Too slow in this terrain. You will ride with me." My heart slammed. "With you?" "Yes." I've never, the confession burned. I'd never ridden astride behind an alpha, never been allowed anything that looked like closeness, never been permitted the illusion of choice. Cyprian's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in calculation, and then his voice dropped. "I know what you're thinking. You don't owe me trust, but you do owe yourself survival." He released my chin. "Can you hold on?" I swallowed, tasted blood. "I can try." "Good." He turned and strode to a massive black horse that looked like it had been carved from night. He spoke to it under his breath, one hand on its neck, and the animal stilled, obedient to him in a way that was almost unnerving. He swung up, then leaned down and offered his arm. I hesitated only long enough to hate myself for hesitating. Then I let him haul me up. The moment I settled behind him, close enough to feel the heat of his back through wet layers, my body reacted with a traitorous shiver. His scent wrapped around me, smoke and pine and iron, and my returning Omega signature flared like it recognized a language my mind hadn't learned yet. Cyprian went rigid, as if he felt it too, as if control was something he wore and I had just tugged at the seam. "Arms around my waist," he ordered, clipped. I did it. My fingers clenched hard, more from terror than intimacy. I focused on the leather of his belt, on the reality of rain in my lashes, on the fact that death was behind us and speed was ahead. Cyprian clicked his tongue. The horse surged forward. The world became motion, branches whipping past, mud spraying, soldiers riding flank with heads down against the rain. Somewhere behind, another horn screamed in frustration, and I imagined Basilion's face contorting with fury as his prey slipped away. But Basilion wasn't the only danger. My scent, my real scent, kept blooming in waves, each one more confident than the last, like my body was reclaiming itself out loud. I could almost feel invisible threads reaching through the forest, the way alphas described it when they spoke of true mates. A pull, a certainty that made their instincts roar. If Basilion had ever been my fate, he would be feeling that pull now. And if Cyprian felt it too, I tightened my arms around him, not in comfort, but because my knees threatened to slip on the slick saddle. Cyprian's voice carried back to me low. "Breathe through it." "I am," I lied. "You're not," he said. Quieter. If you panic, your scent spikes. If your scent spikes, every alpha within a mile loses what little sense he has. Shame flared. Even now, my body could become an accident someone else blamed on me. I forced air in, slow, through the nose, like he'd said. I fixed my gaze on the line of his shoulder and tried to match my breath to the steady rhythm of the horse. Gradually, the frantic edge softened. The scent didn't vanish, but it steadied, becoming less like a scream and more like a truth. The trees thinned. Ahead, through rain, a dark shape rose from the hills, stone walls, watchtowers, banners snapping in the wind. Not Basilion's polished estate, but a fortress meant for war. A place where soldiers lived, where rules were simple and enforced with steel. Cyprian's garrison. The gates opened at his approach. Men shouted his name, voices rough with relief. Torches flared along the walls despite the rain, their light turning the courtyard into a flickering, amber-stained world. Cyprian rode straight through, not slowing until the doors of the main keep yawned open. Only then did he swing down and lift me off the saddle with a quick, efficient motion that didn't linger. My legs nearly folded. My ribs screamed. The sudden lack of motion made the world tilt. Cyprian caught me at the elbow again, always the elbow, never the waist, never the places that felt too intimate. "On your feet," he said, not unkindly. "We're inside now." Inside smelled of stone and smoke and boiled herbs. Warmth hit my skin like an accusation. I shivered harder, my body trying to decide if it was safe to stop bracing for impact. Cyprian barked orders to the nearest officer. "Bring physician Aurelian, now, and clear the south chamber. No one enters without my permission." The officer's eyes flicked to me, an Omega in rags under the commander's cloak, and something like surprise crossed his face. But he only saluted and moved. Cyprian guided me down a corridor lit by iron sconces. Boots echoed. Servants pressed themselves to the walls to make room, eyes lowered. I expected contempt, the curled lip of nobles. Instead, I saw something else. Respectful caution. Not for me, for him. But it meant no one reached out to grab me, no one laughed, no one called me stray. We entered a chamber with a bed built into the wall, heavy blankets, a small hearth, and a wash basin already steaming. Someone had moved faster than I'd expected. Cyprian shut the door behind us with a finality that made my heart jump. Silence, thick and private. He turned, gaze scanning me like a battlefield report. "Cloak off," he said. I froze, fingers tightening on the blanket. My mind flashed with memories of orders that had led to pain. Cyprian's jaw flexed. He exhaled once hard, as if fighting himself. "Not for me," he added, clipped. "For the physician. You're soaked and bruised, and I need the truth of your injuries documented." Documented. Evidence, procedure. It shouldn't have soothed me, but it did. With shaking hands, I slipped the cloak off my shoulders. My torn dress clung damply to my skin. Cold air kissed bruises I hadn't even felt until now. Cyprian's gaze went flinty. He turned abruptly toward the hearth and shoved more wood into the fire with unnecessary force. "They did this in my brother's house," he said, voice low. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't comfort. It was rage looking for a direction. "Yes," I whispered. He didn't speak for a moment. The fire crackled. Rain tapped the window. Then he said, very quietly, "I warned Basilion once what happens when an alpha lets wolves into his home and calls them family." My throat tightened. "You hate him." Cyprian's head turned slightly. "I don't hate easily," he said. "It's inefficient." The answer should have been cold, but it was. It was honest in a way that left no room for pretty lies. A knock sounded. Before I could flinch, Cyprian was already at the door, opening it just enough. An older man stepped in, carrying a leather satchel that smelled of antiseptic and dried plants. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp, his posture too steady to be merely a servant. "Physician Aurelian." His gaze landed on me and softened into something clinical but not cruel. He didn't stare at my rags. He stared at my bruises. "Commander," Aurelian said. "Document everything," Cyprian replied. "And test her scent. I want confirmation of potion use." Aurelian nodded once. "Understood." Cyprian moved to stand by the hearth, present, watching, but not hovering. Still, I felt him like a wall at my back. It was strange, having an alpha as a barrier instead of a threat. Aurelian approached with a small vial and a strip of treated paper, both marked with runes I didn't recognize. "May I?" he asked, holding them up. "The word may hit me harder than any blow." I swallowed and my voice came out thin. "Yes." He took a small sample from the inside of my wrist, barely a scratch, nothing like the ritual blade at the altar. The treated strip darkened slowly, ink spreading in delicate veins. Aurelian's brows drew together. "There are traces," he said. "Scent thief draft, high concentration. Whoever administered it wanted the effect immediate." My stomach dropped even though I'd known. Hearing it confirmed felt like a gavel. Aurelian glanced at Cyprian. "It's wearing off, but not fully. The body is recalibrating. She'll have spikes of scent expression, especially under stress." Cyprian's gaze sharpened. "How long?" "By morning, it should be mostly gone," Aurelian said. "But the after effects can linger: headaches, tremors, sensitivity." And he hesitated, eyes flicking to me. "The psychological impact is not minor." I looked down at my hands, suddenly ashamed of existing as a problem. Cyprian's voice cut through. "She'll be protected." Aurelian nodded, then began examining my injuries with methodical care. He didn't pity me. He didn't scold me. He simply treated what was there: ribs, wrists, lip, temple. Each touch was professional, and when I flinched, he adjusted without comment. When he wrapped my ribs, the pressure hurt at first, then steadied into support that made it easier to breathe. "You're fortunate," Aurelian murmured, not as a compliment but as a fact. "No punctured lung. The bruising is severe. Whoever struck you knew how to hurt without killing." The room tilted slightly. My mind went blank in that way it did when the truth was too clear. Cyprian's voice dropped, dangerous. "Names?" Aurelian's gaze flicked up. "Commander, I can only report what I see." "I'm not asking you," Cyprian said, and his eyes locked on me. My throat worked. My tongue felt too large. In the end, it wasn't bravery that made me speak. It was exhaustion. "My stepmother's guard captain," I whispered. "Sergeant Halric." "He did most of it. Marcelline ordered it." Cyprian's face didn't change much, but the air did, his dominance tightening like a fist. "Halric," he repeated. "Good." Aurelian finished bandaging. "She needs food, water, and sleep. Warmth. No crowds, and," he added carefully, "she should not be exposed to aggressive alpha pheromones while her system stabilizes." Cyprian's gaze held steady. "No one enters." Aurelian packed his satchel. Before leaving, he looked at me again, and his voice softened into something almost kind. "You're not dirty, child," he said. "Mud washes off. Theft does not stain the stolen." My eyes burned. I blinked hard, refusing tears. Aurelian left, the door shut. Cyprian turned from the hearth and approached the bed, stopping a careful distance away, as if he'd mapped my fear and refused to step on it. "Eat," he said, gesturing to a tray that had appeared while I was being examined: bread, broth, dried fruit. I stared at it, then at him. "Why are you doing this?" His gaze didn't flinch. "Because my brother was about to ruin a bond under false scent and call it holy." "That's politics," I said bitterly, surprising myself with the edge in my own voice. "Not me." Cyprian's eyes narrowed. "Politics doesn't explain the bruises." I opened my mouth, then shut it again. He exhaled, and for the first time I saw something like restraint in him, not the restraint of a gentleman, but the restraint of a wolf holding back teeth. "You asked why," he said. "Here is the truth. I took you because I wanted Bazillion to suffer, and then I smelled you. Heat crept up my neck despite the chill. That doesn't sound like kindness. It isn't, he said, not at first. The honesty made my breath hitch. Cyprian stepped closer, just one pace, then stopped again. But now you're under my protection. That part is not negotiable. I should have felt trapped. Instead, my chest did something strange, tightened, then loosened, like a rib cage remembering it could expand. I sat on the bed slowly, wincing. The blankets were heavy, clean. My hands hovered over the food as if it might vanish. Cyprian watched me for a moment, then turned away, giving me space without leaving. He went to the window, staring out into the rain-washed courtyard where soldiers moved like dark ants, efficient and alert. I ate in small bites because hunger and nausea were tangled together. The broth warmed my throat. The bread sat in my stomach like a promise I didn't trust. When I finished, fatigue rolled over me so hard it felt like gravity doubling. Cyprian's voice came from the window, quieter now. "Sleep. I'll be outside the door." "You're not staying." The words slipped out before I could stop them, half fear, half something else I didn't want to name. Cyprian's head turned slightly. "Do you want me inside?" he asked, tone controlled. My heart stuttered. The idea of an alpha in the room while I slept should have made me panic. But the idea of being alone made my skin crawl. "I don't know," I admitted. Cyprian held my gaze for a long beat, then nodded once, as if accepting an order from something deeper than pride. He moved to the door, pulled a chair from the corner, and set it near the threshold, inside, not outside. "I'll sit there," he said. "I won't touch you, I won't speak unless you need something." My throat tightened. "Thank you." He didn't respond to gratitude like a man who craved it. He simply settled into the chair, posture alert, eyes forward, a commander on watch. I lay down slowly, every bruise complaining. The blanket swallowed me. The room was warm. The fire crackled. Rain whispered against the window. Sleep took me in uneven waves. In the middle of the night, I woke gasping, the taste of that bitter potion back in my mouth, the altar's candles flickering behind my eyes. For one awful second, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw him. Cyprian, still in the chair, unmoving except for the slight tilt of his head as his gaze landed on me instantly, like he'd been waiting for the moment my fear surfaced. "Nightmare," he said. I swallowed, humiliated by how obvious I was. "Yes." He didn't ask what it was. He didn't demand details to feed his anger. He rose and crossed to the hearth, poured water into a cup, and brought it to the edge of the bed without stepping into my space. "Drink," I drank. My hands trembled so hard the cup clicked against my teeth. Cyprian's eyes flicked to my throat, then away again, as if he refused to let himself stare too long. "Your sense spiked," he said quietly. "You're safe." The words hit something in me I hadn't known could be hit. I nodded once, unable to speak. He returned to the chair. I slept again. By morning, the potion's residue had faded enough that my own scent felt steady, still present, still powerful, but no longer lashing out like a frightened animal. I stood at the wash basin and scrubbed my hands until the water turned brown, then clear, then pink-tinged when I scrubbed too hard. When I lifted my face, the mirror showed a girl I barely recognized. Bruised, swollen lip, eyes too large in a too thin face, hair tangled like straw. But there was something else there too, a quiet fury. Cyprian knocked once and entered without waiting for an answer, as if he trusted his own discipline more than my fear. He carried folded clothing, simple, clean, dark wool and linen. No lace. No humiliation. Practical garments that would fit into a soldier's world without making me look like a joke. "I had them brought," he said, placing them on the bed. "Wear these," I stared. "You planned for me." "I plan for everything," he replied, then paused. His gaze held mine, And I don't intend to hand you back. My stomach tightened. He will come with legal papers. Cyprian's mouth curved faintly, humorless. Let him. It didn't take long. By midday, horns sounded again, this time from the fortress walls, not the forest. Shouts rang through the courtyard. Soldiers ran to positions. The air shifted, charged, a familiar prelude to conflict. Cyprian didn't rush. He adjusted his gloves, buckled his belt, and looked at me with a steadiness that felt like a vow. "They're here," he said. My hands went cold. "Bazillion, and others," Cyprian replied. "Your stepmother's envoy, likely Marcelline as well. They'll want to perform innocence in public." A knock came. An officer entered at Cyprian's command, saluted, and spoke quickly. "Lord Bazillion requests parley at the courtyard dais. He claims the Omega you took is his property under household law and demands her return. He also claims his intended bride has been wronged." Cyprian's eyes turned to ice. "Of course he does." The officer hesitated, then added, "He brought a sent priest." My breath caught. Sent priests were used to verify bonds, to interpret the moon's will through ritual and pheromonal resonance. If Bazillion had a priest, he intended to make this official, to force a declaration that would corner me. Cyprian's gaze flicked to me. "He wants to trap you with ceremony," he said. "He wants you to be afraid of the crowd." I hugged myself, nails biting skin. "I am." Cyprian stepped closer, then stopped, visibly choosing restraint. "Then we do this differently," he said. "We do it with rules." He turned to the officer. "Summon my council, and send for Aurelian with his documentation. If Bazillion wants the moon invoked, we'll invite the moon to look closely." The officer saluted and left. Cyprian looked back at me. "You will stand with me," he said. "Not behind, not hidden. If you want protection, you take it publicly. It becomes harder to steal you in shadows." My throat tightened. "And if I can't speak?" Cyprian's voice softened by a fraction, the tiniest concession. "Then squeeze my sleeve," he said. "Once for yes, twice for no. I'll do the speaking until you can." The idea of having a signal, of having any control at all, made my eyes sting. I nodded. In the courtyard, Bazillion stood at the base of the dais in full formal attire, as if he could transform himself into righteousness through fabric. His hair was slicked back, his posture practiced. Around him clustered nobles who had come to watch, and guards with hands on weapons. Beside him stood Marcelline in her torn veil of virtue, face pale, eyes shimmering with tears that looked expensive. When her gaze found me at Cyprian's side, her expression cracked for half a heartbeat. Hatred, raw and panicked. Then her mouth trembled and she looked away, a perfect victim again. The sent priest stood between them, hands folded, eyes lowered as if he were above pack politics. I recognized him from stories, Priest Caldor, known for finding the moon's truth for the highest bidder. Bazillion's gaze landed on me, and the pull hit me, fate's cruel thread, tugging like a hook behind my ribs. My body responded with a traitorous tremor, sent lifting involuntarily. Bazillion inhaled. His pupils dilated. His jaw tightened as if someone had punched him. For the first time since I'd known him, his controlled mask slipped, and hunger, instinctive, possessive, flashed across his face. "There," he said, voice hoarse. "There you are." Revulsion crawled up my spine. Not because the bond thread existed, but because his entitlement wrapped around it like chains. Cyprian stepped half a pace forward, blocking Bazillion's direct line to me with his body. The movement was subtle but absolute, a commander placing himself between danger and what mattered. "This is my fortress," Cyprian said, voice carrying. "State your claim succinctly." Bazillion lifted his chin. "You took an Omega from my household during my bond ceremony. She belongs under my authority, and I demand her return. Her presence here is an insult to my house and my bride." Marcelline sniffed delicately, a sound engineered to soften the crowd. Cyprian's gaze flicked to her, sharp as glass. "Your bride," he repeated. "Interesting." Bazillion's eyes narrowed. "Do not play games." Cyprian's voice remained calm. "I'm not. The moon is." He gestured to Aurelian, who stepped forward holding papers sealed with wax and a small treated strip identical to the one he'd used on me. "This physician will testify," Cyprian said, "that the scent used at your ceremony was stolen by potion." "Not fate, not the moon." A ripple ran through the onlookers. Shock, excitement, greed for scandal. Bazillion's face tightened. "That is an accusation against my bride." Marcelline lifted trembling hands. "I would never," she whispered, loud enough to be heard by those nearest. "I loved him. I only wanted," Cyprian cut her off. "Priest Caldor," he said, turning to the scent priest. "You came to interpret scent. Do it." Caldor's eyes lifted, cool and assessing. "The moon's truth is delicate, Commander. It requires cooperation." Cyprian's mouth curved slightly. "You'll have it." He turned to Bazillion. "If you claim she is yours, we verify it properly. Here, now, under witness, using a scent mirror." Bazillion stiffened. "A scent mirror is a military tool." "It's a truth tool," Cyprian corrected. "Unless you fear truth." A few nobles murmured. The crowd leaned forward. Bazillion's pride twitched visibly. "Fine," he snapped. "Do it." Caldor nodded with performative solemnity. A servant brought out a shallow silver basin etched with runes, water inside so still it looked like mercury. "The scent mirror," Caldor gestured. "The Omega approaches, the Alpha approaches, they breathe. The moon will echo what is real." My feet felt like stone. Cyprian's hand hovered near my elbow, not touching. "One step at a time," he murmured. I walked. When I reached the basin, my reflection stared up at me, warped by etched runes. Behind my own face, I saw Bazillion's, handsome and hungry. My stomach clenched. Caldor instructed us to breathe slowly over the basin. Bazillion leaned in, and his dominance pressed against me like heat, trying to push me into submission. I swayed. Then Cyprian stepped closer, not into the ritual, but near enough that his presence became a steady wall at my side. His scent didn't flood the basin. He didn't interfere. He simply existed. And somehow that was enough to keep me upright. I breathed. The basin's surface trembled. A thin, pale light threaded through the water like moonlight spilling into a crack. The runes along the rim glowed faintly. Caldor's eyes narrowed. He watched, waiting for the sign that would make the crowd clap and Bazillion victorious. The light brightened, then fractured. The glow split into two ripples that refused to merge, skittering away from each other like oil and water. The basin's surface went abruptly dull, the runes fading as if the moon itself had turned its face away. A silence hit the courtyard so hard even the banners seemed to freeze. Caldor's mouth tightened. He tried again, muttering an invocation. The basin remained stubbornly dull, dead metal and ordinary water. Bazillion's face went slack with disbelief. Caldor cleared his throat. "The bond does not." Bazillion slammed his fist onto the dais rail. "It's wrong," he snarled. "It's malfunctioning." Caldor's eyes flicked to Cyprian, and fear lived there briefly, small and real. "The basin does not malfunction," he said carefully. "It reflects. The moon's echo is absent." Marcelline made a sharp sound. "No," she whispered, then louder, tears spilling. "That can't be." Cyprian's voice cut through like a judge's gavel. "The moon did not bless your ceremony." Bazillion's gaze snapped to me again, wild now. "But I feel her," he said, voice rough. "I feel the pull. She is mine." The thread behind my ribs tugged, traitorous, and I hated it. I hated fate for being so indifferent to consent, to cruelty, to what I had suffered. I took a shaky breath. My fingers curled into Cyprian's sleeve once. Yes, the signal we'd agreed on, but not for him to speak. for me to borrow his steadiness. Cyprian's eyes flicked down, then back up, and he nodded once. My voice shook when I spoke, but it carried. You feel a pull, I said, staring at Basilian. And you call it love, but you watched me on the floor and did nothing. Basilian's lips parted. For a moment, he looked genuinely stunned, as if he had never considered that the girl in rags could have a voice. Marcelline stepped forward, desperate. She's lying, she sobbed. She's jealous. She always wanted. I turned my head toward her, and the courtyard seemed to sharpen. You poured poison down my throat, I said. You stole my scent like you stole my name, and you did it smiling. Marcelline's face twisted. The crowd watched, hungry. Basilian's gaze darted between us, confusion and fury battling. Marcelline, he said slowly. Did you? Marcelline's tears stopped too quickly. Her mouth hardened, and for the first time her voice lost its softness. I did what I had to, she hissed, then caught herself as nobles gasped. She tried to recover, to look fragile again, but the crack had shown. Cyprian's voice turned lethal. Aurelian. The physician stepped forward and held up the treated strip. Potion residue confirmed, he said, voice clear. Scent thief draft. The courtyard erupted in murmurs. Basilian's face went red, then white. You humiliated me, he whispered, and the words were not directed at Marcelline first. They were directed at me, as if my existence had inconvenienced his pride. My stomach turned. Cyprian stepped forward fully now, claiming the dais with posture alone. No, he said. Your weakness humiliated you. Willingness to be deceived because deception benefited you. Basilian's eyes narrowed into something feral. You want her, he said, voice thick. That's what this is. You want my Omega. The crowd held its breath. Cyprian didn't deny it quickly. He didn't posture. He looked at me first, as if checking whether I'd break under the attention. Then he looked back at Basilian. I want her safe, he said, and I want your house cleansed of the rot you call family. Basilian's hands trembled at his sides. She is my true mate. The thread tugged again, and I forced myself not to flinch. Cyprian's gaze sharpened, and his voice dropped into something older than manners. Then claim her properly, he said, with her consent. Basilian laughed once harsh. Consent is a luxury. The words hit the courtyard like a slap. Something in me went very still. Cyprian's hand moved, not to me, but to the hilt of the ceremonial dagger at his belt, the one commanders wore as symbol as much as weapon. His voice went calm in the way storms go calm before they break. Say that again, he murmured. Basilian lifted his chin, pride overriding sense. Consent is. Cyprian moved so fast the eye struggled to follow. The dagger flashed not toward Basilian's throat, but into the dais rail beside his hand, pinning Basilian's sleeve to wood with a precise, humiliating stab. Basilian jerked, startled, trapped by fabric and steel. The crowd gasped, some stepping back. Cyprian leaned in, close enough that only Basilian and I could clearly hear him. You do not speak of consent as luxury in my fortress, he said, voice low and absolute. You do not speak of Omegas as objects, not in front of me, not in front of her. Basilian's jaw clenched, his face flushing with rage and embarrassment. Release me. Cyprian straightened and withdrew the dagger in one smooth motion. He didn't look at the blade. He looked at Basilian's eyes, and his dominance rolled out like a banner unfurling. Here is the law you forgot, Cyprian said, turning to the crowd. If an alpha's claim is contested and the Omega refuses him, the pack may hear the Omega's choice. And if the alpha attempts to take by force, the Omega's guardian may call the sovereign challenge. A shiver moved through the nobles. The sovereign challenge was not court theater. It was old pack law, a duel for leadership when an alpha proved unfit to protect those under his care. Basilian's eyes widened slightly. You wouldn't. Cyprian's gaze was ice. Try to take her, he said softly, and I will. Bazillion's attention snapped to me again, and something in him broke free of diplomacy. His scent surged, aggressive, trying to dominate me into compliance. My knees went weak. The thread behind my ribs tightened like a noose. I squeezed Cyprian's sleeve twice. No more waiting, no more letting them decide the shape of my life. Cyprian's head turned just enough to see, and his jaw flexed. I stepped forward. The courtyard seemed to tilt as every eye landed on me, Usalenve, mud once on my face, now standing straight in borrowed clean clothes, still bruised, still shaking, but upright. My voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. I refuse Bazillion Rhost, I said, each word burning as it left me. Publicly. Completely, forever. The silence that followed was so sharp it felt like glass. Bazillion stared, disbelief turning into fury. You can't, he snarled. You don't understand what you are. I understand what I am, I whispered, and my voice steadied on the last word. I am not your punishment for being deceived. I am not your consolation prize. I am not your property. Marcelline's breath hitched, and I saw in her eyes the dawning horror that her potion hadn't just failed. It had given me something she'd never intended to give. A platform, a witness. Cyprian stepped beside me, not in front of me this time, beside. The difference made my throat tight. Bazillion's hands curled into fists. He looked at Cyprian as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You've turned her against me. Cyprian's voice was cold. You did that yourself. With every moment you watched and chose comfort over courage. Bazillion's gaze flicked to the crowd, searching for allies. Some nobles avoided his eyes. Others watched with interest but no loyalty. The soldiers on the walls remained still, loyal to the commander who fed them and led them. Bazillion's pride made a final, desperate leap. Then I invoke my right, he said sharply. She is my true mate by fate. I will take her to my house and complete the bond. He stepped forward. Cyprian moved before Bazillion could reach the first stair. You will not, Cyprian said, voice ringing. Bazillion bared his teeth. Or what? Cyprian drew his dagger again, not to stab wood this time, but to lay the blade flat against his own palm, a ritual gesture that made the crowd's murmur die instantly. I call the sovereign challenge, Cyprian said. Here, now, under witness. For the right to lead House Rhost as High Alpha because Bazillion has proven unfit to protect and unworthy to claim. Bazillion's face went slack with shock. Then it twisted. You want my title, he hissed. Cyprian's gaze didn't waver. I want my house to stop bleeding from your softness. The crowd erupted shouts, whispers, frantic excitement. Sovereign challenges were rare in the era of contracts and ceremonies. They belonged to old songs and bloody histories. And yet, here it was, called in rain and mud and betrayal. Bazillion looked around again, desperate for someone to stop it. No one did. Because the rules were older than anyone Alpha's comfort. Calder cleared his throat, voice cautious. If the sovereign challenge is called, it must be accepted or refused. Refusal is an admission of unfitness. Bazillion's nostrils flared. Pride was a chain around his throat. I accept, he spat. And when I win, I'll take what is mine and I'll... Cyprian's voice cut through, flat. Threaten her again, and the duel ends before it begins. Bazillion snapped his mouth shut, trembling with rage. They cleared the courtyard space quickly. Soldiers moved benches back. Nobles clustered at the edges, eyes bright. The rain eased into a mist, as if even the sky wanted to watch without interference. Cyprian removed his uniform coat, handing it to an aide. Bazillion did the same, baring his arms, trying to look like the stronger brother. Cyprian didn't look like the stronger brother. He looked like the inevitable one. Before they began, Cyprian turned to me. He didn't touch me. He simply held my gaze. If you don't want to watch, he said quietly. Go inside. I swallowed, tasting fear. If I go inside, I whispered, I'll feel like I'm back on the floor again. Something flickered in his eyes, approval, maybe, or sorrow. Then stand where you can see, he said. And remember, you chose. No one is choosing for you now. I nodded, and my hands clenched together so tightly my knuckles turned white. The duel was brutal and fast. There was no graceful court fencing, no pretty flourishes. Basilian came in hard, fueled by humiliation. Cyprian met him with a calm that was frightening, blocking, redirecting, using Basilian's rage like a weapon against him. Steel rang. Boots slid in wet grit. Basilian swung too wide once, and Cyprian stepped inside the arc with a move so efficient it looked almost gentle, then sent Basilian to the ground in a breathless, punishing impact. The crowd gasped. Basilian struggled up, snarling, eyes wild. He charged again, and this time Cyprian disarmed him with a twist that ended in Basilian's weapon skittering across stone. Cyprian's dagger pressed to Basilian's throat in the same instant, not slicing, just there, a line between life and death. Silence fell, complete. Cyprian's voice was low. Yield. Basilian's eyes darted to me. I saw the exact moment he understood he'd already lost me, regardless of titles or fate threads. His throat bobbed. His pride tried to hold on, but the blade didn't care about pride. Basilian's shoulders sagged with a hatred that had nowhere to go. I yield, he rasped. Cyprian stepped back and sheathed his dagger as if Basilian were already irrelevant. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply turned to the crowd. Witnesses, he said, voice carrying. House Rhost has a new high alpha. The response wasn't immediate cheering. It was something heavier, acknowledgement. The kind of acceptance forged by rules everyone feared, but everyone respected. One by one, officers and nobles lowered their heads. Cyprian turned to me again. The thread behind my ribs tugged, fate's cruel joke trying to reassert itself through Basilian, trying to insist that biology outweighed choice. But as Cyprian looked at me, something else answered inside my chest, quieter and stronger than the thread. Not fate. Trust. Cyprian approached slowly, stopping a careful pace away. He can't take you now, he said, my throat tightened. He'll try anyway. Cyprian's gaze flicked to Basilian, who was being escorted away under guard, face hollow with rage and shock. Then he'll die trying, Cyprian said simply. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with the aftermath. Calder slipped away quickly, sensing which way power had shifted. Marcelline stood frozen, veil damp, eyes wide. Guards moved toward her. No, she whispered, suddenly frantic. Wait, please. It was my mother's idea. She said Marcelline didn't deserve. I turned to her, my hands trembling. The old fear rose, fear of her words, her influence, her ability to twist rooms against me. But this room had changed. It was no longer hers. Cyprian's voice cut in. Marcelline Vey, he said, and every syllable sounded like a lock closing. You will be held for trial under oath for potion craft and attempted bond fraud. Marcelline's face contorted. You can't do this. You're not my concern, Cyprian replied. You made yourself the moon's concern. She looked at me then, desperation turning into venom. He'll ruin you, she hissed. He's a commander. He's cold. He'll use you and discard you. The words landed in my chest like stones because part of me feared they were true. Part of me believed I only deserved being used. Cyprian didn't react to her taunt. He looked at me instead, as if giving me the choice of whose voice would shape my future. My lips parted. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He saved me, I said, from you. Marcelline's eyes burned, and then guards took her by the arms and led her away. When she was gone, the courtyard felt strangely open, as if the air itself had exhaled. Cyprian's council assembled that evening in the keep's great hall to formalize what the duel had decided. They spoke of titles, seals, oaths to the house. They discussed Basilian's confinement, Marcelline's trial, and the restitution owed to those harmed by potioncraft. I sat near the hearth, hands wrapped around a warm cup, listening as if through water. The politics washed over me in waves, but underneath it all was one simple truth. No one was dragging me back to the floor. After the council, when the hall emptied and shadows stretched long, Cyprian approached me again. The firelight made the scar on his brow look softer, less like a threat and more like a story. "You spoke well today," he said. I almost laughed. I shook like a leaf. "And you spoke anyway." His gaze held mine. "That matters more." A silence formed between us, one that wasn't awkward, just full. I swallowed. "What happens to me now?" I asked, and hated how small the question sounded. Cyprian's jaw flexed as if he were choosing words he didn't often use. "You stay here," he said, "if you want. You'll have rooms that lock, guards who answer to me, food that belongs to you, clothing that fits, a name spoken without contempt." My eyes burned again. I blinked hard, furious at my own tears. "And the bond," I whispered, because it hung between us whether we named it or not. "Am I destined to be pulled toward Basilian forever?" Cyprian's gaze sharpened, not with jealousy, but with something more dangerous, protective anger on my behalf. "Fate can pull," he said. "It cannot force your feet to move." The words loosened something in my chest that had been clenched for years. He took a slow breath. "I won't lie to you," he continued. "My instincts react to you, strongly. That doesn't give me the right to take anything." I stared at him because I wasn't used to alphas talking about rights like they applied to omegas. Cyprian's voice lowered. "If you choose me, if you ever choose me, it will be because you want it. Not because you're cornered. Not because you're afraid. Not because you think you owe me for saving you." My throat tightened. What if I want protection and I don't know what else I want? Cyprian's gaze softened by a fraction, the smallest crack in armor. "Then you take protection," he said, "and you take time." He hesitated, then added, almost grudgingly, "and you learn what it feels like to exist without being punished for breathing." The next weeks were not a fairy tale. They were healing, slow, stubborn, sometimes ugly. Some mornings I woke with my heart racing, certain I could hear Marcelline's voice in the corridor. Some nights I flinched when doors closed too hard. My body, once trained to obey fear, didn't always accept safety without suspicion. But Cyprian never punished my suspicion. He kept his word with a discipline that felt like a new kind of magic. Guards were posted. Orders were enforced. When nobles asked invasive questions about the mud Omega, Cyprian's stare made them forget how to speak. Aurelian visited and taught me how to breathe through scent surges, how to drink bitter teas that steadied the tremors. He spoke to me like a person, not a problem. And in small ways, the fortress changed around me. Servants began meeting my eyes. Soldiers nodded respectfully in corridors. Someone left a comb outside my door without a name attached. Someone else left a shawl embroidered with a small moonflower, no longer a symbol of stolen purity, but of endurance. Basilian was exiled after his confinement, stripped of authority, and sent to a distant holding where his name could do less harm. The council judged Marcelline publicly. Under oath, confronted with Aurelian's evidence and witnesses from my father's household, she finally broke, not into remorse, but into the kind of fury that revealed what she'd always been. She was sentenced to removal from noble protection and placed under strict covenant, unable to purchase potioncraft again without immediate arrest. Her stepmother, who had thought herself untouchable, lost her standing entirely, and her household was audited until every hidden cruelty crawled into daylight. Justice, I learned, was not always kind, but it could be thorough. One evening, after my ribs had stopped aching with every breath and my reflection had begun to look like mine again, Cyprian asked me to walk with him along the fortress walls. The sky was clear, cold, scattered with stars that looked close enough to touch. We stood above the dark hills, wind tugging at our cloaks. Down in the courtyard, soldiers trained by torchlight, their movements sharp and disciplined. Life continued, ordinary and brutal and real. Cyprian leaned his forearms on the stone parapet. "I'll call you my Luna if you stay," he said, voice quiet. "Not because you're decorative, because you'd be the heart of this house. The one the pack looks to when they need a reason not to become wolves." My breath hitched. "That sounds like a burden." "It is," he said, "and it's also power." I stared out at the hills, remembering mud in my mouth and my sister's smile. "What if I fail?" Cyprian's gaze turned to me, steady as stone. "Then you fail in a place that won't kill you for it," he said, "and you try again." Silence stretched, filled with wind and distant laughter below. I turned toward him. "You still haven't asked me," I said softly. Cyprian's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he knew exactly what I meant and hated that his throat had tightened anyway. "Asked what?" he said, voice deliberately neutral. "To choose," I whispered. The wind tugged at my hair. My heart hammered. Fear rose, not of him, but of the sheer, dizzying possibility that my life could be something other than survival. Cyprian didn't move closer. He didn't trap me against stone. He simply waited, giving me space big enough to breathe in. I stepped forward on my own, close enough now that I could feel the warmth of him in the cold air, close enough that my scent lifted in a soft, confident wave, no longer screaming, just speaking. His nostrils flared and his jaw flexed with restraint, but he didn't reach for me. I lifted my hand, hesitated, then placed it lightly against the front of his coat, over his sternum. I could feel his heartbeat, steady and heavy. "I choose the one who pulled me out of the mud," I said, voice trembling on the truth. Cyprian's breath left him slowly, controlled, like he was holding something dangerous inside his chest and refusing to let it break free too quickly. "Say it again," he murmured. "I choose you," I said. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, just a flicker of vulnerability, a crack in the commander's armor. When he opened them, the pale gold in his gaze looked warmer. He lifted his hand toward my cheek and stopped, hovering. "May I?" he asked. The question shattered something old and rotten in me, something that had insisted my body was never mine. "Yes," I whispered. His gloved fingers cupped my cheek gently, thumb brushing the edge of my split lip where it had healed into a faint scar. The touch wasn't greedy. It wasn't claiming. It was reverent in a way that made my throat burn. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to mine, an alpha gesture older than any court vow, a promise of protection without the violence of a mark. The contact sent warmth flooding through me, steady and grounding. My eyes closed. I let myself breathe him in. Below us, the fortress carried on, indifferent to romance, loyal to duty. Above us, the moon hung pale and distant, watching without speaking. "I won't rush you," Cyprian murmured against my brow. "But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." My voice broke on the reply. "I don't need proof," I whispered. "I needed someone to stop." Cyprian's hand tightened slightly, not painful, just present. "Then we stop the world that made you kneel," he said. "One rule at a time." Later, when the fortress quieted and the hearths burned low, we stood before the council and the pack, and Cyprian spoke the formal words that named me under his protection by law, not by possession. He didn't parade me like a trophy. He introduced me like a person. Marcelline Vey, under the High Alpha's shield, free to refuse, free to choose. The pack answered with a low murmur of acceptance that felt like the first home I'd ever had. In the months that followed, my laughter returned in small, startled bursts, like a bird testing wings it didn't trust. My hair grew back thicker after Aurelian's tonics. My hands stopped shaking when doors shut. I learned the fortress's rhythms, learned which soldiers needed a steady word and which needed silence, learned how to look at a room full of alphas and not automatically lower my eyes. Cyprian remained what he had always been, sharp, disciplined, dangerous to those who threatened what was his to protect. But with me, he was patient in a way that didn't weaken him. It strengthened something in both of us. He listened when I spoke. He waited when I hesitated. He never used fate as a weapon. One night, as winter softened into early spring, we stood again on the walls. The wind was gentler. The world below looked less like an enemy. Cyprian's hand found mine, and this time he didn't ask. He didn't need to. I laced my fingers with his and leaned into the steady heat of him. The mud of that chapel was still part of my story. But it wasn't the ending. I lifted my face to the cold sky, inhaled air that belonged to me, and let my scent rise quietly into the night, unmasked, unashamed, finally my own. And beside me, the high alpha of House Rhost stood like a fortress made flesh, not to cage me, but to keep the wolves away while I learned how to live. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. I truly appreciate you spending your time with this story, and I hope it left you satisfied, soothed, and a little bit obsessed in the best way. If you were in Marcelline's place, would you have publicly rejected Bazillion the moment the truth came out, or would you have used his guilt to secure your own power first? Tell me which choice you'd make and why in the comments.